Hi, I'm Tom Lippincott, and welcome to Melodic Minor Complete, Part 2, where we get into practical applications. The first part of the class was concerning theory, all the different places that the melodic minor scale can be used, and when to use it, why to use it. And of course, today we're going to be talking about how to go about introducing that scale and into your vocabulary, getting it in your ears, getting it into your muscle memory, and really owning the melodic minor scale, really having it be a part of your vocabulary that you have mastered. Before we get started, a brief explanation about my guitar here for anyone who might be new to my classes. This, as you can see, is an 8-string guitar. However, the inner 6 strings are the same as a regular guitar, E, A, D, G, B, E. Same as any other regular 6-string guitar. So anything that I play on the inner 6 strings, the shapes will look exactly like it does on your guitar. So it's not like it's some different thing that you won't be able to figure out what I'm doing. The only thing that's different is I have an extra low string below my low E string, which is a low B, a 4th below the low E. And then on the high side, high in pitch, not geographical distance, of course, closest to the floor, but meaning highest in pitch, I have an A, which is like the 5th fret of the high E string. But anything that I'm going to ask you to play and anything I'm going to demonstrate, I'm only going to restrict myself to the inner 6 strings, so it'll just be like I'm playing a 6-string guitar. And I'll probably remind you as I go through, I'll say, you know, I'm on the 6th string here, because sometimes people do get confused. I play this note and they think that I'm on my 5th string, but this is my 6th string. Okay, and then the only other thing that people get confused about a little bit, but this is very minimal, is the fan frets. You can see that my frets are crooked here, but if you look at the 12th fret, it's actually perpendicular to the strings, just like a regular guitar, and it actually fans gradually out from the 12th fret in 2 different directions, this way and this way. So when we get to the bridge, it's angled this way, inward, and then the same kind of opposite angle at the nut. And all that is my higher strings, it manages to make them a shorter length than the lower strings, and that works better for the tuning. I have a 9 for my high A, and it would be really hard for me to tune a 9 up to a high A on a regular scale length guitar. Well, this guitar from here to here is shorter than a normal guitar, and that just enables me to tune this string up to an A without it breaking. As I go down, the scale length gets longer and longer for each string, but the relative distance between the frets for each string is just the way it works on any normal guitar. So my high E string, 1st fret, 2nd fret, 3rd fret, 4th fret, just goes up chromatically. So there's no indiscrepancy with the tuning. It's not like my frets are, you know, make the notes farther apart than they would be on a normal guitar. Nothing like that. It works exactly the same. All the examples that we're going to be going through today at the beginning of the class are going to be in C melodic minor, just like we were using C melodic as our sort of example key for the last class. But I highly recommend and urge everybody to transpose these exercises that we're doing into other keys as soon as you feel comfortable doing so. We will actually be doing some of that later on in this class when we get into using the melodic minor modes on Stella by Starlight. To start off with, I'm going to give several different approaches to applying the scale to the guitar fingerboard. Starting in example 1 here, I'm giving you a very common way of approaching it, which is dividing it in the fingerboard into 7 different positions. So basically 1 for each note of the scale, and finding all of the notes available in that position. This fingering is based on the basic concept of 3 notes per string, except In each case, on either the third string or the second string, there will only be 2 notes, and that will allow you to basically stay in one position for the entire, from the top to the bottom of the scale. One other thing that I want to point out, and this goes for a lot of these things that we're going to be talking about today, which is you may look at example 1 right off the bat and say, well, this is interesting because it starts on an F, and I thought we were talking about the C melodic minor scale in this class, which we are. This is C melodic minor. But this brings up a point that I think is really important, actually, which is the idea that although the obvious thing to do if we're learning how to play a C melodic minor scale would be to start on C and end on C, maybe something along those lines, right? And a scale fingering like that can be great for technique practice and could be certainly a good way to supplement getting to know the scale in the neck. But what we're using these fingerings for, and just in general getting to know the scale in the neck, our goal is to be able to use it to improvise. And when you improvise, you want to be able to have the freedom to go anywhere in the scale you want, start anywhere, end anywhere. So we don't want to get too ingrained or too sort of attached to the idea of always starting on the root of the scale. So this, my whole concept here is based on where I happen to be on the fingerboard, not where the root of the scale is. So that's why this first one starts on F and ends on A. It's just because those happen to be the lowest and highest notes available in this part of the neck. Now, for convenience sake, I do give them each a name based on the modes that we talked about in class 1, and this is just for convenience sake so that we can, if we're talking about the fingering that's Lydian flat 7, that's this first one that starts on F, like that. And each one of these, as we go up the neck, is based on a different note of the scale, as I said. So here's all 7 of those played at a fairly slow tempo and close-up to give you a real good idea of the fingerings. That is a very popular way to lay out the scale on the fingerboard, and if you get to know it this way, I think you'd have a pretty good sort of an idea of where the notes are on the guitar neck. However, one of the things that you may notice in going through these is there are some stretches involved with that particular fingering system. The second system that I'm going to go through is one based on the caged system, which a lot of you are probably already familiar with for major scales, based on the idea of the C, A, G, E, and D chord shapes, but transposed up the neck to stay as C chords, right? Whoops, sorry. So I'm taking C, A shape, G shape, E shape, and D shape up the neck, but still making them all be C chords, and then basically basing a major scale fingering around each one of those chord shapes. And most of the time, at least in my experience, the caged method of coming up with scale fingerings tends to avoid stretches and instead tends to kind of creep up and down by a fret or two in order to avoid those stretches. So that's what I've done here. Now, again, just for convenience sake, I use these sort of titles. We start off with the A form shape. Now that's assuming that we were talking about a C major, but of course, you know, and that would be the C major scale based off of that shape. But since we're dealing with melodic minor, I've taken all my E's and made them E flat, so it would actually be based off of that shape. Right, so that's the basic fingering. Anyway, so there are only 5 of these. So fewer fingerings, less thorough coverage of the guitar neck, but the upside is maybe 2 less to learn than the previous one, and also less stretching. So here's that one in close-up. Next, if you look over here on page 22, we have a third option, and this is also a really popular one. A lot of people who use economy picking like this one because it works out really well for economy picking, and that's 3 notes per string. Now this one is really self-explanatory. It's literally, as the name suggests, 3 notes on every string, pretty much no matter what. Now what ends up happening with that, if I do the first one here, notice that I started down here and I ended up a little bit higher on the neck. So this one is not based on a particular position. It kind of goes across this way. But again, the advantage is that it's consistent, the same number of notes on every string, and if you're using a picking pattern like economy picking, that works out really well. Also, if, let's say, for example, if I was playing triplets, works out really well for that too. So I just gave the first example of the 3 notes per string, but you could work the rest of them out for yourself if you're interested in that. But here's the first one in close-up, example 3. This next one, example 4, is a little more extreme. This is 4 notes per string. Now this one, obviously, unless you have giant hands, you wouldn't be able to play in one area of the neck. So basically what I'm going to do is move my hand along the string as I play each one of the 4 notes on each string. But what I am going to try to keep consistent is to do 1 note per finger. So even though, like for these first 4 notes, F, G, A, B, I'm using fingers 1, 2, 3, 4, even though I am sliding my hand up and down, I'm not going to, you know, do something like this, because the goal here is to be able to get some fluidity with this. Something along those lines. And once again, I just gave one example, although you could obviously move that to other starting and ending places on the neck. There are fewer possibilities since we're covering a bigger span. But anyway, this is fairly self-explanatory, so again, if you're interested in pursuing that, you can work out those other fingerings on your own. For example 5, this is an approach that I think is of utmost importance, maybe the single most important one of all of these, and that's playing on 1 string. This enables you to really see the structure of the scale graphically up and down the guitar neck, And it's just a really good way to break things up and a good alternative to position playing across the neck. If you have a really good command of one string and across the neck, you're going to have a really solid picture of the entire guitar neck of any scale or whatever structure that you're working with. So here's example 5, where I'm going to take the entire range of the C melodic minor scale just on the B string. So obviously you'll want to work out on your own the other 5 strings, and eventually, as you feel ready, to work out the other 11 keys on each individual string. One other thing that I want to point out here before we move on is notice those first 4 notes. I've got half step, whole step, half step. And I could think of that at the beginning of the 7th mode of the scale, right? The super Locrian or altered scale. It looks a little bit like a half-whole diminished scale, at least the first part of it. And then if I go to E flat and go the rest of the way up the scale, I get this shape, which is all whole steps. Interesting. So first of all, you may remember from the first class that one of the alternate names for the altered scale was diminished whole tone. That's where that name comes from. The first part's like a diminished scale, second half's like a whole tone. But also, this can be a real useful sort of a handle when you're looking at the structure of the scale on the neck. You can find those same 2 shapes in other places, on other strings, in other octaves, and even when you're working with harmonic material that we'll be talking about later, you can also take advantage of that kind of property that the scale has. Next, we're going to move on to page 23, and we're getting into playing some dyads intervallically up and down the strings on 2 strings at a time. So to start off with, we're playing seconds, or 2 notes that are 1 note apart but at the same time. So I'm starting off here with E flat on the B string and F on the high E string, and then I'm basically just taking each one of those up the C melodic minor scale. Right. So here's that in close-up, example 6. Now, we're going to do the same thing with the other intervals, thirds, fourths, fifths, sixths, and sevenths, and so on, but we're also going to try a few different variations on this. That was just simply playing the scale up harmonically. Now, obviously, again, to save time, I didn't write it out and give you examples for all the different pairs of strings, but you'll want to do this on your own. Find out, what the shapes look like and what they sound like on all the different pairs of strings to play seconds up and down the individual strings, and then, or up and down the pairs of strings, I should say. Now moving on to example 7, we're going to move to thirds. So I'm still on strings 1 and 2, and I'm still just doing this simple ascending harmonic pattern, and I'm starting with D and F, the 2 lowest notes I can play in thirds on these 2 strings, and then I'm moving this up the C melodic minor scale, again in thirds. So here's that in close-up. You can kind of see the pattern here. I could do the same thing with fourths, fifths, sixths, and sevenths. And this is important, A, because it's just another way of looking at the scale and another approach. And also, a lot of these patterns can be really practical for coming up with melodic patterns. That last one that we just did, I like to use those a lot in my improvisations, the thirds in the melodic minor scale. They sound really nice to my ear, and they lay well under my fingers, and I make use of those a fair amount. The next couple of intervals we're going to talk about are fourths and fifths. Now that gets a little bit strange. If I take, as I do in example 8, now here I'm moving to a different pair of strings, the third string and the second string. The first fourth that I can get is the open G string and then C, first fret of the B string. And now if I continue moving that up the scale diatonically, I get a perfect fourth, another perfect fourth. This next one, interestingly enough, is a weird interval. It looks like a major third, but it's actually a diminished fourth. It's taking a perfect fourth and lowering it, and we get this diminished fourth. Now we go to the next one. It sounds like a major third, but it's actually not. Which is one of the reasons why it's kind of weird, because our ear hears it as a major third. Okay, now as I go up, I get two perfect fourths, and then I get another non-perfect fourth interval. This one's a little more conventional. Most people are used to encountering this one, the augmented fourth, which is also known as the interval of a tritone, and I get two of those in a row, E flat to A and F to B, and then I finish out with my perfect fourth. And now there's one other twist that I'm doing, is I'm playing these melodically instead of harmonically. So instead of like this, I'm playing them one note at a time, just to show an alternate way of doing it. So here's that example 8. Now for example 9, I'm moving to another set of strings, which is strings 3 and 4, and I'm doing fifths, and I'm also playing these melodically, and the note pairs that I get are B and E flat, which is an augmented fifth. It's another kind of slightly weird one because it's a lot like a minor sixth, or it is like a minor sixth. And then I have perfect fifth, diminished fifth, or tritone, another diminished fifth, perfect fifth, and then finally my augmented fifth again. And then I'm doing another variation on that, which is melodically but the high note first, and so forth. So here's that one, example 9. Now turn over here onto page 24, and we're going to play some sixths. So the first thing you'll notice about this is we're no longer dealing with adjacent strings. We're doing non-adjacent string sets with a string in between, because this interval is large enough that we could play like between F and D here on the 6th and 5th strings, but that's a pretty big stretch. It's a lot easier to play F on the low E string and then open D string, skipping the A string. So I'm going to go up from there, and that would be similar to what I've done before. But I'm also adding another twist to this, which I'm going up in 6th, but I'm going across the different string sets. So I'm doing the first 3 notes here on this pair of strings. Now I'm moving to 5th and 3rd strings and continuing the pattern. And I just do that for 2 of the notes. And then for 4 more pairs of notes, I'm on strings 4 and 2. And then finally, I'm moving up to strings 3 and 1 and finishing out the pattern here, all the way up to F and A. So here's that example 10. Now, if you look at example 11, I'm going to play some 7ths. Just like with the 6th, I'm using non-adjacent string sets. This time I'm staying on the same set of strings, the B and the D strings, and I'm starting with these 2 notes. And then one of the things I'm doing differently with this one is instead of ascending, I'm descending. So I'm starting at the top and going down. And then furthermore, just like when I play them melodically, I can either go down or up. I'm alternating between down and up. So I'm playing down the first one, up the next one, and on down. So it's a little more of a complex pattern. Here's that example 11. So I would advise you to try all different ways to play these. As you've seen, I've kind of broken them up into different approaches. And when I practice these, I might not always practice them the same way. I might, one day be in the mood to play a certain interval group harmonically and then melodically and come up with different patterns. First of all, that helps keep things interesting for me as I'm practicing. but it also keeps my brain from developing too much into sort of pre-worked out patterns, so that when I'm improvising I have a little bit more likelihood of doing something spontaneous if I don't always practice it the same way twice. Now on to example 12, we have a slightly different concept, which is taking 3 different notes. So I'm combining 2 intervals here. I'm combining a fifth, which starts with E flat to B, that augmented fifth, and then I'm also combining that with a third between the third and second strings, which is B and D, and I put those together and I get this 3-note grouping. Now I mentioned in the written materials here that this could actually be thought of as a triad of sorts, not a traditional triad, but if I think about this, this is sort of like an E flat augmented major 7th chord with no third. So it's E flat augmented major 7, no 5th, maybe if you want to think about it like that. But regardless, I could also think about it just as 3 notes. So here in example 12, I'm taking this 3-note pattern up the scale, and then now since that is a 3-note pattern, it would be natural to play it maybe as triplets, but just to make things a little more interesting, I'm playing in 4/4 eighth notes, so I get 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, right? So rhythmically it doesn't work out perfectly, and that gives you this sort of slightly more complex kind of sound. So here's example 12. Now example 13, I'm doing something similar, but I'm doing a bigger pair of intervals. They're both sevenths. So I'm starting way up here at the top of the neck with B, A, and G. The B and A are sevenths apart, A string and G string, and then the G string to the high E string, that's also a 7th apart. So big intervallic span there. And then instead of just doing down the scale like I did in some of the other examples, I'm also making this a little more complex by taking this little 3-note cell, and instead of going down to the next 3 notes, I'm skipping these and going sort of down a third like that, then up the next one, up, down 2, up 1, down 2, up 1, down 2, up 1, down 2, up 1. Right? So there's example 13. As you probably can tell, that's just a few of almost limitless possibilities. You can come up with ways to combine these notes and intervals, and I found this concept to be really useful not only in learning, getting more fluent with the scale, but also in actually, from a practical standpoint, coming up with interesting patterns to play the notes in, to get under my fingers to use in my improvised solos. Now on to page 25, we're going to do a similar kind of idea, but with the position-oriented scale. So we're going to be going across the strings this way, and of course we're just dealing with melodic stuff in this respect, because a lot of it is 2 or 3 notes per string. So I'm using that Locrian shape, that one, back in the 7 different scale positions. That's the Locrian one. I'm using that as my model, but again, I just kind of randomly chose that one. It could have been any of them, or one of the cage system fingerings, or one of the 3 notes per string, whatever. But this is just one that I chose as my sort of home base to use to model these from. So the first one, I'm writing out sort of an entire exercise here. Example 14 shows the melodic minor scale played in thirds. So most of you are probably already familiar with this concept, but I'm starting on my B, skipping the C, and going to D. So up 2 notes, and then down 1. I'm covering the one that I skipped over, and then going up 2 from there, and then just kind of making that a repeating pattern. And then to come down, I do the opposite. I play the highest note, skip the next highest, go to the 3rd highest, and then go up 1. And then I just continue that pattern all the way down. So here's that one in close-up. This will help you get more flexibility with the scale, get to know where the notes are. Just the more different ways you play it, the more different ways you look at it, the more familiar you'll get. Plus, again, just like we did with the up and down on pairs of strings with the intervals, this can also give you sort of the building blocks of melodic material. If the only way you practice the melodic minor scale is up and down in seconds, like that, then more than likely when you are trying to improvise with the notes in the scale, you're going to find yourself falling into that same pattern, and your solos are going to sound dry and like exercises. Obviously the thirds sounds kind of like an exercise when we hear the whole thing from start to finish, but a lot of great melodies will have little fragments of that pattern in them. So you're learning sort of the raw material that a lot of great melodies were built from when you learn patterns like this. Example 15 now, we're going to move on to fourths, which is like this. Just like we did on pairs of strings, but staying in one position. But I'm going to further demonstrate another concept, which is that we have 4 different sort of permutations. Now we sort of hinted at this a little bit with the last section, but I'm going to get real specific with this here. We can come up the first pair, up the second pair, and just continue that all the way up, or we can come down the first pair, down the second pair, and down all the rest as we go up. Or we can vary every other time. I can come down, then up, down, up, down, up, or I can do it the other way. Come up, down, up, down, up, down. So there's 4 different permutations. One interesting thing that I want to point out here, though, before we move on, is if we look at 15A, up, up, up in fourths, if I take away that very first note, the B, and start on E flat, look at those first 2 pairs of notes. That's E flat down to C, which is a third, and then F down to D, which is another third. So in actuality, the up-up pattern in fourths is the same as doing a down-down pattern in thirds. So there's this sort of weird intersection between these 4 permutations. One of them is the same as one of the ones in the previous interval. Then the same thing will happen if I do the fourth down-down pattern. That'll be the same as the 5th up-up pattern, and so forth, all the way up. Now on to page 26. I'm just going to go through a couple of other common patterns, and again, a lot of you are probably already familiar with these, if nothing else from working with major scales or maybe some other scales. So that's the what I'm calling 1, 2, 3, 1 pattern. The first note, second note, third note, and then coming back down to the first note and making that a 4-note cell, and then just going all the way up the scale. So here's that, example 16. Now example 17 does the same thing but just 3 notes and then just immediately goes on. So it's 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And of course I'm doing this one in a fairly obvious way as triplets. Now example 18 takes the thirds idea and goes one more third and makes that into a 3-note pattern. This also turns out to be a diatonic triad from the scale. In this case, B diminished, the 7 triad. C minor would be the next one, D minor, E flat augmented, F major, G major, A diminished, B diminished, C minor, and so forth. Now when I come back down the scale, I'm starting on the C and going down 2/3, so C to A to F, which still gives me a major, still gives me a triad. In this case, it is a major triad: F major, 5th, 3rd root, or C, A, F, and then just down the diatonic triads from there. And again, I could also, that's probably one of the more common ways to do this, is up when I'm ascending and down when I'm descending. But you can also practice the opposite way, or you can practice going up both ways, you know, and so forth, or down, you know, when I'm ascending the pattern but coming down each triad. But anyway, so here's the most common way to do that, example 18. Now in example 19 at the bottom of the page, I'm adding yet another third to get my diatonic 7th chords. So B, D, F, A is the first one, which of course is B half diminished arpeggio. And then from there on out, I'm just doing all the other ones. D minor 7, E flat augmented major 7, F7, G7, A half diminished, B half diminished, C minor major 7, and all the way up. Now the next little thing that I'm doing that's slightly different is, we talked about how you can come up or down each pattern. Here I'm alternating, so I'm coming up the B half diminished, down the C minor major 7, up the D minor 7, and so forth. So now over here on page 27, I have a really useful pattern that helped me a lot when I was first learning my melodic minor scales. Example 20, what I'm calling 7-note extended arpeggios. So the concept here is, again, this idea of going in thirds. I'm starting on my 5th string on the 3rd fret C, and then I'm just going up a third to the 4th string E flat, same string G, and then B on the 3rd string, D on the 2nd, F on the high E string, and then another note on the high E string, A. And that gives me all 7 notes in the scale arranged in thirds. And notice that it's 1 note per string, except the D string has 2 notes and the A string has 2 notes. Now the way I have this written out is those 2 places where I have 2 notes on the same string, I'm doing a hammer-on to play the 2nd note. This would be really conducive to if you're using sweep picking as a pick style player, which is what I used to do when I played with the pick. So that sort of thing. I'm imitating a pick here. Or what I do as a fingerstyle player is I'll play thumb, index, hammer-on, middle, ring, pinky, hammer-on. So it's kind of a similar concept. Either way, First of all, it really got me seeing the way the scale was laid out on the fingerboard in a really complete way, and it also was the first time I was able to sort of get these under my fingers. It sounded a lot to me like some of the things I was hearing on records by people like John Coltrane, where he would play what they called sheets of sound. It sounded a lot like the stuff I could hear him doing on the records, which up until that point I'd just been kind of frustrated figuring out how does it get that sound, because it kind of sounded like arpeggios, but I would play something like this and it wouldn't sound anything like what he was playing. So that was another sort of a way that I got some use out of this. Also, one interesting thing about this is you can kind of use bits and pieces of these, like let's say the top 4 notes, and I could just bring that up the fingerboard and get some great fingerings for arpeggios for the 7th chords. So anyway, here's example 20. Then the other thing that you can do to also, and this is a really good technique builder, is to practice these alternate picks. Now, of course, I'm a fingerstyle player, so alternate picked for me, rather than playing down, up with a pick, I use my thumb alternating with my middle finger. So it's the thumb is kind of like a pick's downstroke, and the middle finger is kind of like the pick's upstroke. So I'm going to demonstrate example 20, alternate picked, quote unquote, but played with that. But anybody that obviously it's a pick style player, you can just play, you know, alternate picking with these. So here's that. Now on to example 21. I'm demonstrating this 5th and 5th pattern, which for anybody who's seen some of my other classes, you may have already seen something similar to this. Starting on low F, going up a 5th to C on the A string, then up to G on the D string. And then I'm going up a 2nd on the 3rd string to A, up a diminished 5th to E flat, and then up a augmented 5th to B, and I get this 6-note pattern that has a big wide interval span, and it's only 1 note per string. This could be done again alternate picked, sweep picked, or as I'm doing it, thumb, index, middle, thumb, index, middle. And of course there's all kinds of different permutations you could work on with this. I talk about that in greater degree in the Modern Jazz Guitar series, I believe. But here is example 21. Once again, as I mentioned when we were talking about the intervals on, you know, up and down pairs of strings, as you can see, there's an almost limitless way to combine these. And that last one was just one example of a pattern that I use sometimes in my improvisation, just to get that wider interval sound. But it's my hope that some of you will sort of take this and run with it and come up with some patterns on your own that are really interesting and unique to you. Now on page 28 in the written materials, I mention that in addition to sort of practicing all these pre-worked out patterns being a good way to get to know the scale better and even getting some material for improvising, I think it's also really important to spend some time, especially once you get a little bit of familiarity with the notes on the fingerboard, just to do some improvising, some free playing, where you just kind of let your fingers and your ear tell you where to go. So I'm going to just demonstrate that a little bit. I'm going to turn my metronome on here to a medium tempo, and I'm going to improvise just on the C melodic minor scale, but I'm not going to give myself any other restrictions. I'm allowed to go anywhere on the neck. I can go across the strings, up and down the strings, combine it any way I feel like it, and just do a little bit of improvising. So something along those lines. I'm just, again, letting my creativity go, and I wasn't leaving a lot of space there because I was trying to demonstrate different ways of, getting through the scale, but that might also be something I could work on too, is creating musical phrases and leaving space in between them. But generally the idea here is just to improvise on the scale. I'm getting one step closer to actually improvising. So now we enter the realm of harmony. So far we were talking mainly about playing single notes, a little bit of harmony with the dyads, but now we're going to start talking about triads and seventh chords and how they apply to the melodic minor scale. So we already know theoretically what the diatonic triads and seventh chords are, but now we're going to go about finding them on the guitar neck and finding all the different places where they lie and how to get to all of them. So to start with, I'm assuming that most of you here have at least some basic grounding in playing triad and seventh chords, maybe not with the melodic minor scale, but maybe just your basics. So I'm gonna kind of gloss over a lot of this stuff quickly. If anything that I'm talking about here is something that you don't understand or seems confusing, you may want to refer to a more fundamental theory class or some kind of, or get with a teacher about it. My jazz guitar harmony series gets into the basics of triads and seventh chords on the guitar in real detail. So if you haven't viewed those classes, you may consider those as a supplement to this if this is getting into some areas where you're not completely comfortable. So anyway, I'm going to start with example 22 here, and I'm just going to go up diatonically the C melodic minor scale. I'm starting on the top three strings with C minor, C on the third string, E flat on the second string, and G on the first string. Very simple, C minor triad, root third, fifth. And also I'm kind of thinking of this in terms of what notes on the top, because a lot of times when I play this triad, rather than thinking of it as this as a bass note, I'm probably playing with a bass player who's playing the bass note in a low register. So I'm more conscious of what notes on top if I'm playing a melody. Okay, so anyway, I'm going to bring this linearly up the strings this way, diatonically up the scale. So I know this is my triad shape for minor. This would be major if I raise the third. Augmented would be this shape, back to major, minor, and then diminished would have the flat fifth, right? I just use my theoretical knowledge, raise the fifth and or the third or lower to get my different kinds of triads: minor, major, augmented, diminished. And I know that the 1 and 2 chords are minor, 3 chords augmented, 4 and 5 are major, 6 and 7 are diminished. So using deductive reasoning, I can play that scale. So here's that in close-up. For example 23, I'm going to take the next inversion this way. So in other words, if I took my C on the third string and said in a C minor triad, what's the next highest note above that? E flat. Move on the same string to E flat, and then go to the second string, move from my E flat to the next highest note in a C minor triad, which in this case would be G, and then finally on the high E string, move to my next highest note above G, which is now C, the root, and I get these 3 notes together. And that's my next inversion up. Again, for those of you who are familiar with the Jazz Guitar Harmony series, we call this choir style of inverting, as if I'm thinking of each one as its own voice, like a tenor, alto, and soprano, and each one stays on the same string and moves up 1 notch in the chord, so to speak. Now I'm going to do the same thing with this that I did before, root, fifth, third, and this is my minor shape, major, augmented, and then back to minor. Here's diminished, and as I go up I'm going to see those different shapes: minor, minor, augmented, major, major, diminished, diminished, and then back to minor. So here's example 23. Finally, we have one more inversion this direction to cover. We did fifth on top, root on the bottom, root on top, third on the bottom. Now we're going to have third on top, fifth on the bottom, root of course in the middle. So it's this shape, and then of course I'll see what the other chord types look like: major, augmented, major, minor, diminished, right? Because my fifth was here, so it gets lowered for the diminished. And as I go up the scale, I'm going to see those different shapes. Now here, on almost every guitar, I'm going to run out of frets if I try to go all the way up. So what I'm actually going to do is make a quick octave jump. Instead of playing the D minor here, I'm going to jump all the way down an octave, same shape, but 12 frets lower, and then finish out the scale from there. So I get 1 chord, 2 chord, 3 augmented, 4 major, 5 major, 6 diminished, 7 diminished, and then there's my 1 chord again. So here's that one, example 24. Now that just covers the top 3 strings, but obviously there are 3 other sets of strings that are adjacent to each other: 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 3rd, 4th, 5th, and then 4th, 5th, 6th. You want to cover all those as well to get all the different diatonic scales in seconds. So again, I could invert across, like on this triad, bring my G down to a G an octave lower, then my E on the E flat on the 2nd string, down to the 5th string for this triad, E flat, G, C, and then finally bring the C down an octave to the low E string. And I can do the same thing on all the other inversions. This one across all the strings, and this one across all the strings. Again, I cover this more exhaustively in the Jazz Guitar Harmony series, but I'm assuming that most of you are already familiar with this, or at least have had enough experience with playing harmonies on the guitar to kind of be able to figure out what I'm talking about here. So anyway, I'm just giving you one other example, but I'm leaving it kind of up to you to cover all those other inversions and string sets on your own. But this is just an example of approaching one of the other ones, which in this case, it's this one, which is strings 3, 4, and 5, root, 5th, flat 3rd, and bringing this one up that C melodic minor scale. So here's that example 25. The next thing I'm going to do is go to open triad. So if we look at that little table that I have about 2/3 down page 29, I show the 3 inversions of a C minor closed position triad, which we've already seen: C, E flat, G, E flat, G, C, and G, C, E flat. But what if I take each one of those and I bring the middle note either up or down an octave? In this case, I'll bring it down an octave. So I'll bring my I'll bring my E, the middle note of this triad, down an octave to get, or I could play it here, or I could move the C to here. So there's actually several different ways to play that. Here's 1, G on the 1st string, C on the 2nd string, skip the 3rd string, E flat on the 4th. Next one would be G, skip the 2nd string, C on the 5th fret of the 3rd string, and then E flat, 4th string. And then lastly, I could keep these two where they are, but bring my E flat over to the 5th string. Then I have 2 skip strings in the middle. So again, in the Jazz Guitar Harmony series, I go through this in real depth to talk about all those different permutations, exploring different ways of moving around with those triads and how they all work fingering-wise. But I'm just going to cover this really quickly. So I'm going to give you a couple of possibilities for these open triads. The first one is root, 5th, 3rd, or C, G, E flat on strings 5, 4, and 2, skipping the 2nd string. And this one is pretty easy to play, and it's pretty easy to bring this up diatonically. Could be played either as a chord or as an arpeggio. Whoops, sorry. So that works pretty well too. Anyway, here it is in close-up, example 26. So now at the top of page 30, I'm going to take another open triad. This one is the 3rd on the bottom, then the root, then the 5th, and I'm going to play it up this same set of strings diatonically. but of course add one more twist to it, which is play it melodically. So this is just a few possibilities with these, but I highly recommend getting familiar with especially the closed triads, just again to give you a better picture overall of how the scale lays on the fingerboard and the harmonies. And then the open triads have a lot of really cool possibilities too. And really those are the only two ways of at least arranging the notes. Obviously there are different sets of strings you can play them on, and you could even offset one or more of the notes by an octave to get a really big span, but in terms of the order of the notes, there's just those 6, that's it. Now look halfway down page 30 and you'll see cycles 3 and 4. Again, those of you who've gone through some of my other classes will recognize this, but for anybody who's new, we're just taking the triads just the same way we did before, going in seconds, but this time doing bigger intervals, either thirds, like that, or fourths. Now, obviously that's a really big leap, right? So there's a much closer way to get through cycle 3, that first one that I started, and also cycle 4. A, it gives me better voice leading, and B, I don't run out of frets if I do it the way that I've got written out here. So example 28, cycle 3, this is actually fairly simple, and it's really cool once you get the hang of this. It can be a really fun exercise and a great way to get to know the scale better. So I'm starting with a C minor triad, C, E flat, G on strings 4, 3, and 2. And all I have to do to get from C minor to E flat augmented is to take the root of the triad that I'm presently on, move it down one diatonic step, and by magic, I'm suddenly playing an E flat augmented triad. All right? Now this formula is going to stay the same throughout the whole cycle. So now to get from E flat augmented to G, I just find the root of E flat augmented, which is now here on the 3rd string, bring it down a diatonic step from E flat to D, and there's my G major triad. For G major, move my root G down to F, and that gives me B diminished, my next triad. Then B goes down to A for D minor, D goes down to F for F major, F goes down to E flat for A diminished, A goes down to G for C minor, and then I'm just back where I started. So here's that whole cycle, example 28. Now for example 29, we're doing cycle 4. This is a similar concept to cycle 3. We're looking for a common tone and keeping the voice leading as smooth as we can. So here's my C minor, C, G, E flat on strings 3, 4, and 5. And I want to get to F major the closest way possible. Well, there's one common tone, C, so I can keep the C where it is. And then I'm going to move my G up to A and my E flat up to F, which was up a step each, and that gives me a real close F major triad, C minor, F major. So my formula there was keep the root of the first triad where it is, move the other 2 voices up a step each, and that'll give me the next triad in cycle 4. So now to get from F major to B diminished, I find the F, which is here on the 5th string, move the other 2 voices up a step each, A to B, C to D, and there's my B diminished. Now in example 29, I give another twist, which is I go across several string sets, or 3 string sets, I guess. So instead of moving to here, I'm actually going to take these same 3 notes, F, B, D, and move to strings 4, 3, and 2. Same 3 notes, F, B, D. So, oops, sorry, there. And then from there to E flat augmented, which I find my B, leave it where it is, other 2 voices up a step each. There's my E flat augmented. Next is A diminished, leave the E flat, root of E flat augmented where it is, and move the other 2 voices up a step each. And then here I'm going to go to D minor, keep the A, move the other 2 voices up a step each. And then finally from there I'm going to move up to G, but instead of here I'm going to put it on the top 3 strings, and then finally resolve to C minor. So here's that in close-up, example 29. So obviously just a couple of examples there, but you would do well to work with these all different sets of strings, both open and closed triads. And personally, I find this a lot of fun. To me, it's like, I don't know, doing a crossword puzzle or something to see if I can, work out where all the different cycles are up and down the neck. Now, at the bottom of page 30, example 30, we're going to get into seventh chords. So I'm starting with closed position seventh chords. Now, as you may know, the inversions of the closed position seventh chords tend to be really difficult to play on the guitar, so we're not going to really get into those. But the root position seventh chords, particularly on strings, the top four strings and the middle four strings, are pretty playable, and they're real practical for all kinds of different uses. So I am going to go through those. Not going to worry about the bottom four strings, because those, again, are kind of unwieldy and they're kind of muddy for everyday use anyway. But here's the top four strings: C, E flat, G, B, which gives me my C minor major 7, one note on each string, 4, 3, 2, and 1. And then I'm just, building my chord shapes from there. Minor 7 would look like this, half diminished would look like that, and then back to minor major 7. If I want to get that augmented major 7, just raise the third and the fifth, and I get this shape. So as I go up the scale, I'll see all those. 1 minor major 7, 2 D minor 7, 3 E flat augmented major 7. We already saw this shape in the previous class. F dominant 7. Now I'm going to go to G7, but here I'm going to switch down to the low octave. A half diminished, a little bit of a stretch between the third and fourth fingers, but once you get used to it, it's not that bad. And this one is a real useful chord voicing. B half diminished, and finally C minor major 7. Now these are real useful not only just as chords unto themselves, but they're also great for upper structure voicings, like we talked about in class 1, making this the upper structure of any of the 7 modes. The minor major 7 sound can also be the upper structure. And then I've also found that the half diminished chord can be real useful for upper structures. Sorry, there it is, A and B half diminished in this key. For example, A half diminished actually makes a great upper structure for B7 altered. So if I put a B underneath that, I get flat 7, flat 9, third, flat 13. So we'll see as we go along all these different ways we can utilize these different voicings. Plus, they also make great ways to just harmonize a melody. Something along those lines. Okay, so here's example 30, which has them all written out and playing for you at a slow speed, so you can kind of see how I'm fingering these. Now at the top of page 31, we're going to do the same thing on the middle 4 strings. This one's a little bit of an awkward stretch between these 2 fingers. So here it is in close-up, example 31. Next, and this is a pretty big subject unto itself, but we're going to talk about drop 2 and drop 3 voicings as they apply to the melodic minor scale. Now, again, those of you who are familiar with some of my other classes, this will already be old hat, and you'll probably be able to go through these pretty quickly. If these are brand new to you, that maybe will take some doing. And actually, if you've never played drop 2 voicings or drop 3 voicings, you may actually want to backtrack a little bit and work with the Jazz Guitar Harmony Part 5 that has the drop 2 and drop 3 voicings in the major scale, or some other instructional material, or get with a teacher to get into those. But this is kind of presuming that you're already a little bit familiar with that. Just a real brief sort of a recap at the bottom of page 31 of how drop 2 and drop 3 voicings work, why they're called that in the first place, is we can take any closed position voicing, It actually can be any inversion, and it doesn't even have to be a seventh chord, just any four notes. If we take the second note from the top, just geographically speaking, the second highest note in the chord down an octave, that's a drop 2 voicing. So here, example 32, I give you a C minor major 7. I'm not going to play it as a chord because, again, I don't want to break my fingers, but, and then I'm going to take the second note from the top of that closed chord and bring it down an octave. So E flat stays, C comes down an octave, B stays, and G stays, and that gives me this fairly playable drop 2 C minor major 7 chord. Then example 33 does the same thing with a drop 3 voicing. So in this case, I'm starting with this inversion of C minor major 7, 5th on top, 7th on the bottom, and I'm going to bring the third note from the top, in this case G, E flat, C, down an octave. I'll put it on the low E string and keep the other 3 where they were, and I get this fairly playable drop 3 voicing. One other real quick sort of tip is notice that the drop 2 voicings were 4 adjacent strings, or this drop 2 voicing, and then this drop 3 voicing was 3 adjacent strings and then a skip string and then the lowest note. So this is going to come into play on these next few pages where we go through all the different inversions. You'll be able to kind of tell real quickly and easily which one is which. The voicings, if you get confused, the voicings that have 4 adjacent strings are all drop 2 voicings, and the ones that have 5 strings span with a skip string between the lowest note and the highest 3, those are the drop 3 voicings. So now look with me on page 32. We have this root position chords sheet here, and what I'm doing is sort of like what I did with the closed position 7th chords. I'm taking you up cycle 2 basically, and linearly. So I'm starting, the very top line is a drop 3 voicing. You can see that it's the low E string, then skip the A string, then the next 3 notes on 3 adjacent strings. And we're consistently using the same group of strings all the way up in every case. But so this is one place to play a drop 3 voicing on the guitar, which is F minor major 7. And then I could also play the same chord on the top 5 strings, in this case F minor major 7 with the root on the bottom, same arrangement of notes, root, 7th, 3rd, 5th, would look like this on the top 5 strings: F on the 5th string, E on the 3rd string, A flat on the 2nd, C on the 1st. Almost the same shape, except the note on this string had to come up a half step when I moved over one set of strings. But that's the same voicing. So now, on the second line down, you'll see that shape that we just saw, but I'm transposing it all the way down to B flat so that we don't run out of frets when we go up. So those top 2 lines are F minor major 7, and I'm making that the key of F, melodic minor, and I'm bringing that diatonically up all the different 7th chords. So F minor major 7, G minor 7, A flat augmented major 7th, B flat dominant 7, C7, D half diminished, E half diminished, F minor major 7. All those diatonic chords all the way up, just like we did with the closed position chords, and you can see how the shapes change when we do each different type of chord. Alright, then we do the same thing with the strings 5, 3, 2, and 1, and so forth. And then the bottom 3 lines give us the drop 2 voicings, and notice that all of these have the root as the lowest note. That's how I group them on this page. Okay, so now we have the drop 2 voicings on the bottom 4 strings on the middle line here, and I'm using the key of F, melodic minor again, root, 5th, 7th, 3rd, bringing that up and down the scale. And then the middle 4 strings, I'm using the key of B flat, melodic minor, root, 5th, 7th, 3rd. That's the shape that we saw when we were working with the basic concept, bringing that up and down the scale. And then finally on the top 4 strings in the key of E flat, melodic minor, root, 5th, 7th, 3rd. So the shapes again are slightly different for each string set. And if you play this entire page all the way up and down each scale, you'll get all the chord voicings for your drop 2 and drop 3 voicings in root position for augmented major 7, minor major 7, minor 7, dominant 7, and half diminished, and all those within root position. Okay, now for the subsequent pages, we're doing the exact same thing, but we're doing all the inversions. So the first inversion page takes the same arrangement of notes, drop 3 voicing on the bottom 5 strings, drop 3 voicing on the top 5 strings, and the bottom 3 lines are drop 2 voicings, bottom 4, middle 4, top 4. And in each case, first inversion of all of those, second inversion of all of those on the third of the set of pages, and then on the fourth and final set of pages we get the third inversion. So basically, as you go through all this whole thing, you'll get every possible inversion of all 5 of those chord types: minor major 7, augmented major 7, minor 7, dominant 7, half diminished. And obviously we go through different keys. Instead of doing, let's say for example, the drop 3, if I just literally inverted it choir style, I'd get this for first inversion, second inversion, third inversion, which is basically just taking on each string. F, A flat, C, E. On the fourth string, E, F, A flat, C. On the third string, A flat, C, E, F. And on the second string, C, E, F, A flat. I just went up the chord from one note to the next on each string, and then I put them all together. I get all the inversions. And then all I'm doing from there is moving each of those to the lowest practical place on the neck. This one comes all the way down to here, and this one comes all the way down to there, and doing them in those different keys. So that's why I'm going through several different keys on the different pages. It's not like an attempt to go through all 12 keys or anything like that. It's just what was convenient to do on the guitar fingerboard. So without further ado, here's that entire exercise. And again, if this is brand new to you, this might be some undertaking. If you're already familiar with your drop 2 and drop 3 voicings, you'll get through this pretty quickly, but it's still worth doing because again, this is all about getting to know the melodic minor scale in all different ways that you can get to know it. So here we go. Okay, so that's all the inversions up all the different diatonic scales. Now, if we go to page 36, we're going to do a couple of examples of cycle 3 and cycle 4 using the drop 2 and drop 3 voicings. And again, I'm just giving a couple of examples and encouraging you to, on your own, try all the different inversions, all the different string sets, different keys as you feel inspired to and feel ready to, and just over time. So example 34 is cycle 3, and I'm using drop 3, this voicing, as my starting point. And this one's actually exactly like the triads. All we have to do is take the root up a step, and that gives us a chord that's a third higher in the best voice leading. So in this case, E flat augmented major 7th. And then it just goes all the way through. So here's that one, example 34. Now example 35 is cycle 4. That one again is a little more complicated, just like it was with the triads. I'm starting with a drop 2 voicing of C minor major 7, 5th, root, 3rd, 7th on the middle 4 strings, G, C, E flat, B, and I'm bringing this through cycle 4 by finding the common tones. Again, this time between C minor major 7 and F7, I'm going to have 2 common tones. The root and the 3rd of C minor major 7 happens to also be the 5th and the 7th of F7, C and E flat. And then so those 2 notes can stay where they are, the 2 middle notes of this chord. The other 2 notes are each going to come down a step each. So G comes down to F, B comes down to A, and that gives me my F7, the next chord. And then I just follow that same formula all the way down. Find the root and the 3rd of F7, which is the 2 outer notes, keep those, move the other 2 notes down each, and that gives me my B half diminished, next chord in the cycle, and so forth all the way down. So here that is, example 35. Now finally, at the bottom of page 36, I have this color tone replacement chart. This isn't going to be quite as crucial with melodic minor scale concepts as it is with other stuff, but it's still worth having as a reference. The idea here is you could take any chord, any 4-note basic 7th chord that has root, 3rd, 5th, and 7th, and replace one of the notes in that chord with one of the notes here. So the way this works, for example, I might take a dominant 7th chord, and I could replace the root with a 9th, flat 9th, or natural 9th. Now, if I'm dealing strictly within the melodic minor scale, I'm going to be somewhat limited in that. Let's say I played this F7, that's the 4 chord in C melodic minor. As long as I'm understanding that I'm trying to stay diatonic to the C melodic minor scale, the only 9th that's really legal is going to be the natural 9, the G. So that would be replacing the root with the 9th and getting me a G9 chord, basically. But that might be a great voicing for an F Lydian dominant sound. Of course, that also happens to be A half diminished as well. But anyway, that's just one example of possibilities for replacing different notes with color tones. But generally, most of these voicings, when you're dealing with the melodic minor scale, are going to be used more as upper structure chords, so you're going to be dealing with the original voicing. The only exception to that, for me, I found the dominant 7th chords in their pure, just root, 3rd, 5th, 7th form tend to be kind of bland and boring sounding, so I almost always replace at least one note with a color tone on those. At the top of page 37, we have example 36, which shows 5 different variations on a basic 7th chord. This is a little different than the color tone concept, although in some ways it's similar. But this basically comes from Mick Goodrick's voice leading books series. The concept here originally comes from that. And what's really interesting and really exciting about this is if you approach this concept and take it through all of the different chord scales diatonically, you'll end up with every possible 4-note chord that exists within any given melodic minor scale. So for example, we see the very first row says variation, Mick Goodrick name, chord symbol. So the first one says original chord, root, flat third, fifth, seventh. That's a 7th chord, and then the chord is listed down here, C minor major 7. So that's the one we're already familiar with. Now let's look at this next one, 4-part fourth. I have a whole class devoted just to this concept, and it uses the major scale and the melodic minor scale both, and really goes through it in detail. But so I'm just going to go over this really quickly, but anybody who's really curious could actually figure out all this stuff on your own. So I'm going to take the 3rd of this chord, which in this case is E flat, and move it up a diatonic step. So E flat comes up to F. That gives me this chord. Pretty cool sounding chord, first of all, right off the bat, right? Okay, well I could move that diatonically up and down a scale, the C melodic minor. Whoops, there we go. So that would be an example of that, and some pretty cool sounds in there, right? Well then, I could do all the different cycles, I could do drop 2 and drop 3 voicings of all of those, and get all these, this whole other universe of sounds, right? Okay, so, and that's just one of those 5. Now look at the 3rd row. I've got replace 3 with 2, Mick Goodrick calls this triad over bass 1. So, go back to my C minor major 7, replace the 3rd, again E flat, go down a diatonic step from E flat to D, and in this case, it looks like a G triad over a C, which is why he calls it triad over bass 1. It's a triad with a bass note, although we can do any inversion of these 4 notes, or all the different. Here's the diatonic chord scale again. So that's triad over bass 1. Next row is triad over bass 2. I take my basic C minor major 7, replace the 5th with the 6th. That gives me this shape, and then if I move it around diatonically, I get these different variations. Again, some really cool, new, exciting sounds there, and imagine doing all the drop 2 and drop 3 versions of that on all the different string sets. You get a whole another harmonic universe. Then finally, we have the spread cluster. That's what Mick Goodrick calls them. And I finally figured out this one is if I take the 3rd, replace it with the 2nd, and the 5th, replace it with the 6th. That's one of the ways that I can derive that voicing. Another way of thinking about this is C, D, and then A, B. So if I reverse those, A, B, C, D, think about that, it's 4 letters in a row. So that's why Mick Goodrick calls it a spread cluster, because in one inversion it's actually a cluster. And then if I invert it, they become spread out. So anyway, I can do the, not going to go through all those, because actually in closed position that can be pretty physically painful to do some of those stretches. But again, if we work out the drop 2 and drop 3 voicings of those, we get some really cool sonorities. So I would encourage anybody who's interested to work with those. You can, work them out on paper first and then try to play them, or you can just kind of, the reason I came up with this replacement note system was because I already was pretty familiar with my 7th chords, and I just figured why not take something that I'm already familiar with and then just do a little variation on it. It's a lot easier that way than to just think about them as totally separate entities. So in the etude that I give you at the end of this class, I'm actually going to use a few of those voicings if you're curious where some of those sounds come from. Next, at the bottom of page 37, we're going to get into some applications of the augmented major 7th upper structure concept. We talked about that in theory in the first class, and a little bit of practice in terms of soloing using that idea. But here we're going to use it for comping, and actually this is a real expansive idea that has massive implications. But the basic idea, I'm taking the last 8 bars of Stella by Starlight, so E half diminished A7, D half diminished G7, C half diminished F7, B flat major. So I got those chords. And I'm applying the melodic minor modes to each one of the half diminished chords and each one of the dominant chords, making it altered. So, as you can see in example 37, I've got E half diminished, the G melodic minor is applied to it, and of course I'm using the augmented major 7th associated with that melodic minor scale. So in this case it would be B flat augmented major 7th, the 3rd mode, and I'm playing this closed voicing that we already learned before, and using that as the upper structure to get a chord voicing for E half diminished. Now I'm going to apply the same concept to the A7 altered. Since this is going to be based on B flat melodic minor, I know that D flat augmented major 7 is my upper structure, so B flat to D flat is up 3 frets. So all I got to do is slide that shape up 3 frets, and that gives me a voicing for A7 altered. So I got this. So now that I have that little cell, B flat augmented major 7 to D flat augmented major 7, I know that my chord progression goes down in whole steps. Right? I have E half diminished A7, then that same move down a whole step, same thing down another whole step. So I can take that same concept and just do it down in whole steps. A flat augmented major 7, C flat augmented major 7, G flat augmented major 7, A augmented major 7. It's a mouthful to say, but just to do it, it's actually pretty easy. And then finally finishing out with B flat major 7. So here's that, played with a backing track, just to kind of hear the context. All right, so that's an easy enough thing to do, right? It's a pretty easy way to get started with. You can say, okay, I could, get some nice, cool chord voicings to comp at the last 8 bars of Stella by Starlight. But think about this again. Think about what this implies. I could play any voicing of B flat augmented major 7th and use that for an E half diminished chord. So all of those drop 2 and drop 3 voicings that we learned, we could use any of that material for this same idea, or you could arpeggiate any of these chords to get material for improvising on this part of the chord progression. Okay, now halfway down page 38, we're going to take that exact same concept and apply it to the minor major 7th chords from each melodic minor scale. So now I'm doing the same thing, same 8 bars, last 8 bars of Stella, but this time to represent each one of the chords, I'm using the minor major 7th chord associated with each melodic minor scale, which actually is in a way simpler, because the first one, E half diminished, I use G melodic minor, and I can use G minor major 7th, the same chord associated with the root of the scale. And then I'm going to take that concept and do the exact same thing I did with the augmented major 7th, up a minor 3rd to B flat minor major 7 to represent A7 altered, move that down in whole steps. F minor major 7 to represent D half diminished, up a minor 3rd, A flat minor major 7. Now here I've run out of frets to keep that shape the same, so I'll move over to this middle 4-string minor major 7 chord that we already learned for E flat minor major 7 over the C half diminished, then move that up 3 frets, or I can play that one on the top 3 strings here, and then I just used a voicing that I like, that voice led okay into that for B flat major 7. So here's that example 38. And once again, this has practically, you know, amazing implications as to all the different things I can do. I can mix those up. I can do some augmented major 7, some minor major 7. When I'm comping, I can use it for soloing, and I can use all those different voicings that we learned. So it's a lot of exciting possibilities, and of course I can do some of those variations on the 7th chords too that we talked about, triad over bass 1 and so forth, for some of those variations on the chord. Okay, now look on page 39, and I'm going to do a little sort of an analysis of Stella by Starlight, applying the melodic minor modes to this. So this is back to kind of the theory idea. This is page 39, but goes into page 40 as well. So I'm just going to go through this quickly. You've got it written out. It should be pretty self-explanatory at this point, but I'll just kind of run through it. First, if you look, each line of music has, of course, the traditional chord changes, but underneath you'll see 2 rows. One says typical substitute sounds, and below that it says basic sound. So the basic sound would be stuff that doesn't include melodic minor or substitution kind of things. And the only place that you'll see melodic minor used in the basic sound row is whenever you get to those places where you have the flat 7 dominant 7th, or if you want to think of it as the minor 4 in disguise. And that does happen a few times in Stella. If you look down on the last measure of the second line, this A flat 7, or in parentheses E flat minor major 7, that's one case where I'm thinking of the A flat Lydian dominant or E flat melodic minor as my basic sound. So that's the melodic minor substitute sound and the basic sound are kind of one and the same there. Then that happens again. The next line down, last measure, E flat 7 or B flat augmented major 7th, which resolves to F major, so it's acting like a minor 4 to 1 there, B flat minor to F major, so I'm using the B flat melodic minor as my basic sound. And then it happens again on the bridge, or the middle 8 bars of the song over on page 40, second line down, first bar, A flat 7, E flat minor major 7 in parentheses, and again E flat melodic minor resolving up to B flat major, so minor 4 to 1 kind of progression there. So that minor 4 to 1 is very important. I think I mentioned that in the first class too. And we see it happen 3 times in Stella right there. Okay, now let's just go through from the beginning and talk through all the different melodic minor usages here. So the first 2 chords, E half diminished to A7. So there I've just played D harmonic minor. That would be kind of my basic sound, like a 2/5 in D minor. But now I'm going to apply the melodic minor sounds to get a little bit more interesting. So that's G melodic minor, or E Locrian natural 2, to the A7. Now I'm A7 altered, or B flat melodic minor. I didn't do any substitutes here. That's just so just basically the B flat major scale over the C minor and the F7. I could possibly play Lydian dominant over the F7, which is C melodic minor. Next line, F minor 7, E flat major scale, B flat 7. Now which is of course B melodic minor, B flat 7 altered. E flat major, or Lydian if I want to get a slightly different color. A flat dominant 7, and of course here I'm thinking of it as the minor 4 chord. E flat melodic minor, of course, resolves to B flat major, which is why we get that minor 4 to 1 concept, is we went from a E flat minor sound to a B flat major sound. Then I have the quick 2/5, right? G and B flat melodic minor, D minor, Aeolian, or I didn't put this down here, but I could also, melodic minor works over just about any minor chord. E flat 7 works as the minor 4 going to B flat major, B flat melodic minor, F major, another quick 2/5 using those same two melodic minor scales, and then A half diminished, which is C melodic, and then D7, E flat melodic to get the altered sound. Next page, G7, A flat melodic to get the altered sound. C minor 7, here's Dorian, or Aeolian, or melodic minor. A flat 7, E flat melodic, of course, B flat major, or Lydian. And then the last 8 bars, which we sort of already went over, but G melodic, A7 altered, D half diminished, F melodic, G7 altered, C half diminished, E flat melodic, F7, F sharp melodic, and B flat major, or Lydian. So that's just kind of a basic rundown of the what scale to use where, particularly with the melodic minor modes. Now, an additional thing that I might do with this is to try practicing it in time. That what I just did there with my handy freeze pedal here was sort of a starting point that you might start off with, just to try each one of the different melodic minor scales, do it totally out of time. And of course, if just that aspect of it is overwhelming to you, break up the tune into smaller chunks. Just do the first 2 bars, do E half diminished and A7, and just work on that for a week or a month or whatever it takes until you really get comfortable with that, and then just do it piece by piece. Anyway, once you get to where you're familiar enough with your different melodic minor scales that you can kind of go from scale to scale relatively without too much of a struggle, you might also take one of these background tracks that I made for you, which is like just playing the chord with a metronome going, no comping or anything really, but just so you can hear the sound of the chord. And what I'm going to attempt to do here is kind of play up and down the scales, and I'm going to stay in tempo, not rest at all, just play all 8th notes, and I'm going to try to keep my momentum going. I'll use 5th position, so I'm going to go from A up to C, or maybe C sharp, and then I'm going to switch direction. Just keep that going the whole time and see if I can go through all those different scales. So here we go. So I pretty much was trying to stick to the scales that we talked about. If I remember correctly, I think when I got to that D minor chord, the 3rd line down, I used melodic minor, which isn't on the page, but that was one variation we talked about. But other than that, I pretty much stuck with the melodic minor scales that are listed here and or the different major scale modes. So that's another way that you might practice this to get your feet wet with using this in a chord change, real-world tune context. Lastly, if you look on page 41, example 40, I give you an etude. It's kind of a one-chorus written out solo on the changes of Stella, played kind of in the style as if I was playing with a trio, like a guitar, bass, and drums. So some of the time I'm playing chords and harmonizing single note lines with the chords. Some of the times I'm just playing single notes, and some of the times I'm sort of comping for myself, occasionally adding a chord. So we start off at the beginning here with that little phrase there that uses the diatonic chords from G melodic minor, and the way we talked about using those closed position 7th chords to harmonize a melody. And then I go to A7 altered, which I start off with this G half diminished diatonic 6th chord from that key, right? And then I'm going to use the same shapes, up a third, but I'm arpeggiating the chords. And then here, I'm kind of comping for myself over this line, but using those voicings underneath. And then I move on to the F minor 7, use an A flat major 7 arpeggio to kind of give you the 3rd, 5th, 7th, and 9th of the F minor 7 chord. Then over the B flat 7, I'm switching over to a pattern that we talked about earlier. It's a 4th and a 7th. I don't know if we did that exact one, but it's a similar kind of concept, and using that from B melodic minor to get the sound of B flat 7 altered. Then when I resolve to the E flat major chord, same idea, but down a half step. And then this pattern, 2nd and 5th, then I transpose to fit the A flat 7, E flat melodic minor chord, kind of repeat it a few times. And then I take that concept up the G melodic minor scale, and then to, which uses the A flat 7 altered with that same pattern, and then, which is the D minor major 7. And then I use these voicings, which are 4-part fourths. Those three are like these regular diatonic 7th chords: D flat augmented major 7th, F7, and E flat 7. But it's quite a bit more interesting sounding if I replace the 3rd of each chord with the note of diatonic step up. So the F goes to G, the A of F7 goes to B flat, and then the G of E flat 7 goes to A natural. A little bit of an awkward fingering, but it's worth it because it's such a cool sounding voicing. So that's just a little example of using those 4-part fourths. Again, I get into that pretty extensively in the 4-part fourth class. And then next, there's my F major 7. Okay, then I have G minor major 7 to represent E half diminished, and then a D flat augmented major 7 to represent the A7. So I'm mixing the minor major 7 with the augmented major 7 concept. Now for the A half diminished, I'm using that E flat augmented major 7, but in this case, I'm using kind of an interesting voicing for it. It's a closed voicing of E flat major 7 sharp 5 that I was able to get using some open strings and a fretted E flat at the 6th fret of the A string, plus with the melody up on top. And then I'm using that 5th and 5th pattern, and then some diatonic triads all over the E flat altered sound, or D altered, or E flat melodic minor. Then I have this pattern that we used before over G7 altered, or A flat melodic minor, but using that intervallic pattern that we talked about before. Then I have triad over bass 1 variations of some diatonic melodic minor chords: C flat augmented major 7th, this, but I replace the third of the chord with the note diatonic step below, so I get a little more interesting sound, and then the similar concept with these other chord voicings. This next one down is B flat minor 7 with the B flat replaced with C flat, and then finally G half diminished with the B flat replaced with A flat. Right? And then the next page, page 43, I'm using tenths up the C melodic minor scale, parallel on strings 5 and 2, and using the open G and D strings as a drone underneath to create kind of these nice thick chord voicings. And then next is the G flat augmented major 7th arpeggio to represent the A flat Lydian dominant sound. Then I have a couple of these 5th and 5th patterns, also the A flat Lydian dominant sound, to get from E flat melodic minor. And then finally, after all that density, we get some nice little lyrical line over the B flat major. And then we have these arpeggios based on the closed position chords moving linearly through the changes. So I've got for E half diminished, G minor major 7, A minor 7, for A 7 altered, B flat minor major 7, C minor 7, D flat augmented major 7, for D half diminished, D half diminished, E half diminished, for G 7 altered, F half diminished, G half diminished. But I'm also arpeggiating the chords with triplets, and for an extra twist, I'm making it a 5-note pattern by playing the 7th of each chord included in the arpeggio. So instead of, it becomes, and then for A minor 7, B flat minor major 7, and all the way up. So what that does is it makes the arpeggios not quite come out even, and it gives you this little kind of off-kilter kind of feel, and makes the line a little more jagged against the rhythm, makes it a little more interesting rhythmically. Finally, over here on page 44, I give you a G flat augmented major 7th arpeggio, 2 notes per string pattern, which I talked about in depth in the Modern Jazz Guitar series. Those 2 notes per string arpeggios to give you that big wide range. Next I have the F7 altered, which is a little piece of one of those extended arpeggio kind of ideas. And then finally resolving to a B flat add 9, which is really a D minor 7 triad over bass 2, replacing the 5th with the 6th note of the B flat major scale. All right, so here is that in close-up, example number 40. So I hope that's given you some ideas for applying the melodic minor material that we talked about today in kind of a creative way. I would again encourage everybody to kind of come up with your own variations, your own ideas, and definitely part of the reason I devoted so much of this class to actually just mastering the scale is the more you get that stuff together, the better you'll have a chance of being able to improvise some of these interesting ideas. So now at the very end of the class I've included some extra materials. I've got a little chord by chord analysis of several commonly played standards with the melodic minor modes sort of gone over. I also included segments of a few commonly played standards that have melodic minor sort of things associated with them. And then I also am giving you a triad and seventh chord arpeggios, ideas that we didn't get to in the class for lack of time. And then also some ideas using triad pairs and pentatonic scales derived from the melodic minor scales. These are both things that I've also talked about in the Modern Jazz Guitar series and other classes as well, but I thought I'd include some of this stuff for anybody who might not have had a chance to look through those classes, just so you have a chance to get some of that material as well. But this class has been definitely a pleasure for me to create, and I've learned a lot, as I always do, from making it, and I sincerely hope that I've given you guys some useful information and some inspiring stuff to work on, and hopefully some fun stuff, some ways to get these sounds into your playing, and sort of so that you own the melodic minor scale. That's my goal, is for you guys to really own that scale and be able to use it as effortlessly and have it flow out of you as easily as any of the vocabulary that you may really know well already. So best of luck to all of you, and I'll see you again in the future.